Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in this Thursday afternoon. We have a special show and a special guest, House Finance Chair Marvin Abney. Thank you for joining us here in studio today.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. I
appreciate your taking the time to come back, having just had a House Finance meeting just a few weeks earlier. And I did check our records. It was just about this time last year we had you in studio. And you told us this time last year that the numbers scared you to death. Now, we know the new numbers that are facing the state here projected $48 million shortfall for FY19, $112 million for FY20. So as you look to rectify the rest of this fiscal year and looking out into the next one, similar apprehension looking at these numbers this year?
I think so. The numbers are always big, but yeah, they do scare me to death. Anytime you have numbers that are in the millions, it freaks you out a little bit, you know. And the reason is that as you go forward and other things are asked for, and then you have these kind of deficits you're looking at, it makes you really have to prioritize what you want. So it still scares me to death. It keeps me up a little less at night than it did before, but you're right about that.
Okay, so you just had the House Finance meeting just a couple weeks ago. Now, obviously, the first order of business is looking to see a budget proposed by the governor. Now, talk with us a little bit about that, because state workers, state government is a big piece of the pie. Were there department heads at this meeting?
That is one of the disappointments that I have, is that there were no department heads at the meeting. There was an A team that was there, and I love those guys very much, but they didn't bring their A game at that point. It's so important that at the beginning of the year, we get a sense of where we are. Remember, we do 60 legislative days, so we're out from some parts of July until now, and we're not there to do a lot of monitoring, and you're on vacation. So when we do this at the beginning of the year, it gives us a sense of where we are, and some of the questions, as you could hear, were directed toward the people who run the departments. But if they're not there to answer those questions, it leaves a big question mark in my mind about, you know, how they've handled the resources we did give them, what they really need in the future, and how to plan forward in terms of balancing that budget in June. So I was a bit disappointed that they weren't there, because they have valuable information that we need.
And would having known that, having had that sort of baseline piece of information again from the department heads, at least have given you that step forward to say, well, how do we begin to address that? Now you're likely not going to hear to them till well into 2019.
Well, that's to be seen. I was, as I say, at one of the few times that I was really disappointed that my committee members and myself didn't get to those questions. So if it looks like I have to have another meeting with them there, I'll just do that. It's just key, and it's important that the directors are there, because they can explain things. You know, if your department has not spent all it needed to spend, or if it has spent more than it needed to spend, there may be very good reasons for that. But without that, it leaves me thinking that, well, when they come and ask for more money in January, I'm really slow and hesitant about recommending to the speaker or anybody else that we fund an organization that we don't really know why they aren't on the marks. And they do give us corrective action reports, and I read every single one of them, but I'm not sure that I got out of the correction action reports numbers on exactly what you can cut or what you can do to make this turn out better. So that's the reason. It's not to micromanage the government's budget, because the executive branch has their own constitutional duties, but we do have oversight. And this oversight gives us a chance to work as a team, so that as we go forward, I can prioritize more of what I'm going to suggest that the speaker do. And I'm not kidding about that at all.
And one of the things that folks always talk about are the one-time fixes and the approaches when there's budgetary issues. One of the things that Governor Raimondo had proposed and implemented was early retirement for individuals within state government. But are we not at record state government employee levels? Did it not go from 13,000 to 14,000? So we're paying people to leave, but yet we're either replacing them or even adding more positions. How can that be rectified?
Well, that's one of the specific things that only the departments of those units can tell us. And that was one of the questions that we always get, is that what's happening with the size of the workforce. But if you don't have someone to explain why that is, I know there are a lot of rules and regulations that go into letting people go or early retirement, but that needs to be explained not just to me, but to my members who then have to explain it to their constituents. And so, on the surface, I don't have the answer to that because no one was there to tell me what the answer to that was and is. I think I know, but if you know me, I don't go off of what I think. I go off of what I know.
And let's talk about some of the more key takeaways before I get into some additional questions from that meeting. How do you feel heading into 2019 based on the information made available and discussed at the last meeting?
Well, I don't feel real good as yet, but I'm always an optimist. I look forward to either late June or early July when I have a balanced budget that I can show. I don't do a lot of these interviews, quite frankly, because I spend my time working and getting it done. But I never leave downhearted. I did leave with a lot of questions, though, of why we didn't get more information than we did. And so did my members. And I have to do all I can to protect them, too. But no, I do think that when we talk about big numbers like we did, we will overcome that. But that just simply means that as we go forward, that some of the things that the governor or that even the state might want or need, we're going to have to look at whether or not that's possible to do, especially in an atmosphere when most Rhode Islanders don't want their taxes raised for anything, and I don't blame them. So we have to work within the pocketbooks that we have, and I think, as I usually say, Mom and Pop understand that, but I need to make sure that my members can get the information that they need to make those kind of decisions, because they're tough. But I don't feel bad, and I want to make it very clear that I'm not quarreling with the executive branch, but I am saying I have an oversight responsibility that I am absolutely dead serious about making sure we go forward in a better way, because we do have, approximately a $48 million gap we got to finish, for this year, and then, another 50, 60, 70 million to go into the next time. So it's just important that we're all on the same sheet of music.
That is for sure. And what do you think when you do see those one-time fixes versus the systemic ones? Obviously, the fact of the matter is that those numbers have to be rectified within this fiscal year and the coming one. But folks do constantly raise those questions. It's not changing things systemically, and you tend to run out of one-time fixes as well. I mean, how do you feel about that when you see those and say, well, I get it, we do need to balance it, but maybe this isn't the best approach?
Yeah, I've never really liked, if you talk about a large budget, I've never really liked one-time fixes. That's just me personally. That doesn't mean that they don't help. But one-time fixes are just that. They're one-time fixes. One of the things I do is try to pay very close attention to the new federal tax laws, to how the economy is doing, all of that before I recommend a budget, because the numbers that I see today may radically change for some reason. So if we have a one-time fix in that's not really fixing it, it really doesn't help me in terms of recommending that we go forward. But I'm not in the position that some of the people who are doing those one-time fixes are in, but I've never been a fan of those. Not even in my own budget at home, because I think that's the way people look at the state government, is that, only do what you can and what you can afford to do, and sometimes a one-time fix is just that, and it doesn't change systemically, and then you get into structural deficits, and that's a problem.
Let's talk a little bit, as you said, what some of the asks might be and what reality might be as well. So as we had discussed, again, $48 million is the projected shortfall for FY19, $112 for FY20. The governor has not been shy during the campaign trail, saying that she's looking to expand the College Promise program, free college tuition for Rhode Islanders. If she has that in her budget, is that a big question mark? Saying, well, where are we going to get the money to pay for this when we're looking at these budget shortfalls and across the board?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be asking the question about every program, whether it's new or whether it's not. That's the reason why it's so important to make sure that there's an understanding of why something happened the way that it did. I understand that we all have to keep going forward. I get that. But we have to do it in a logical and a methodical way that we don't injure the economy that we have. We've come a long way in terms of building the Rhode Island economy to the degree that we're now ready to do some, to compete in the world from my perspective. But you can't do that if a one-time piece of your budget goes awry. For example, we're all waiting to see what the gambling money is going to do for us, what all kinds of things are, but you can't rely on that by itself. And so a lot of the answers to some of the questions that you're asking now, I think about all of the time, but rather than say a number, I would just always say that we've got to make sure we have to understand why the numbers are as they are.
And you talk about gambling and gaming, and that's leads me to my next question. We did see some numbers for Tiverton, flattening out, not being where they had expected. Obviously, sports gambling started later than had been expected as well. And we will start to see those numbers having simply just been implemented the previous month. But do you expect the potential for an expansion for gaming to online gambling options? And is that the direction? As you said, it's tough to with these unknowns, but do you expect to see that on the table as being a possibility for 2019?
Yeah, I mean, there is that possibility. I travel a bit in the summertime in some of my other duties, and the states that have implemented the gambling, they all have the same issue initially. That's true. The numbers were very good at first. They get soft. That happens when you have a new venture, but I don't think we're going to go backwards on that. And I do think it's going to be a help in the future. But technology, getting things started is always a problem with that. But that's why I don't like to rely only on that. Because if you do and something goes wrong for a long period of time, or you have a downturn in the economy, people aren't gaming much, then you set yourself up for a problem. A lot of states will tie that revenue to specific things. And when you start to do that without really good planning, you put yourself in peril of it becoming a nightmare over a period of time. But I do think here we have people who are looking at it in a methodical way, and I do know that in the beginning numbers will be high, they will be soft, but I think it's going to be a help in the long run.
And finally, one of the speaker's top priorities has always been the elimination of the car tax. And looking at those numbers, is it on course along the lines of what he's been proposing year in, year out? And can the state absorb this? Yeah,
we can absorb that. We talked about that last year, and we're pretty much on track in order to make sure that we are still able to carry out the ending of the car tax stuff. That's why we extended it, in terms of doing it all in 1 year, or we said let's do this over 5 or 6 years. So I think we are in a good position for that to happen, and that's so key that you asked that question, because once you make a promise, or once we determine that this is what we're going to do, we have to organize and make sure that the structure from which we're making these payments is there and that they're funded. So those are the kind of things that, as I said last year, keep me awake at night, making sure that those things we promised the citizens of Rhode Island come through. And at this point, I think we're going to be able to do that.
And finally, last question I want to ask, because you mentioned that promise word as well. What is the role for the House Finance Committee when we talk about the program in and of itself? We've seen some numbers come out from CCRI of what they say is the first-year cohort of Rhode Island Promise students. Now, they count the entirety of that incoming class as Promise students and aren't breaking out exactly the students who are getting that free college tuition. How important is the efficacy of the program itself considered when looking at a possible expansion?
Well, transparency about what's happening is everything, and we all talk about how transparent we are. And you can take numbers out of that program and do almost anything you want to do with them. And so I'm not nervous, but I like to look deep into the numbers to see which kids are being affected, what the result of that effectiveness is on them. Because just to give a broad brush of that, I don't think it really tells the real story of what's happening. It is a good program, but it only gets better when you can pinpoint specifically what you need to tweak and what you don't need to tweak. Almost any new program you put out will have to have a little bit of a tweak in it. But unless you know exactly what's going on, it makes it different. It makes it difficult for me to fund something in the future that I'm given broad numbers on. I'm a fairly quiet guy, but when it comes to sitting back and making sure I get this right, I want to get it right the first time, as we used to say in the Army. You don't get a second chance to do many things like this over again. So none of these are bad programs, but I am concerned that if we don't understand them down to the nth degree, it's more difficult for me to add on to that, because if you do, and if you're talking about increasing debt to the state, I get very, very concerned about that. Even though I know that the programs are important, I understand the time value of money, but I do understand that unless we understand exactly what we're doing to the nth degree, we don't know what to fix. And our role is oversight, for one. And the oversight means that people have to come and tell us what they're doing so we'll know how to fund them and support them.
Well, I anticipate that I will likely be there covering when it comes up, as well as many other budgetary items as well. But I appreciate your taking the time to give us an overview as they are heading in to get sworn in on January 1st. So we'll be up there in the new year, but in the meantime, wish you well and appreciate your time coming here to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. House Finance Chair Marvin Abney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap up here, but then be sure to catch GoLocal popping back up with Chelsea Gay and the